to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen. With me today is longtime listener, poet laureate, and Taya master Anne-Marie Young. This is your Daily Dose of Happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today. Anne-Marie, you know how whenever I begin a program, before we get started, I always like to find out, what's the last name? How do you pronounce the last name and so forth? And because our guest today is also a doctor, I also like to ask, what's the proper honorific and so forth. And I actually named 3 different ones and she came up with a 4th one. That tells me this is going to be a fun conversation because we're going to get stuff that I didn't even expect.
I love a good curveball, Walt.
I love a good curveball. I'm a baseball fan. Why not? Yeah. So, Dr. Jessie Hehmeyer, also known as Dr. H or Jessie, welcome to the program. And I understand from talking to you before we got started that you and your husband currently hail from Switzerland, but you're back in the States. Welcome back to the States.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me here with you and Anne-Marie. And it's good to be back in the States, and it's good to be here with you and your audience.
Yeah, we love it. So give us a little bit of your background. How did you end up in functional medicine? By the way, that puts you on the outside of mainstream medicine. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
It's also kind of a rough place to be, but I want to know the story. How did you end up doing that?
Yeah, well, for me, I think a few different things. One is I've always been really curious about my own health and how to maximize my fullest potential. And so in my own journey, really came to see functional medicine or data-driven natural medicine as foundational and essential to my evolution, resolving miscellaneous symptoms around digestion, around my energy, and supporting my adrenals, and just arriving at a weight where I feel my best, all these different things. And along the way, I really got committed to be able to bring this work to others. So that led me back to graduate school to get a couple of graduate degrees and fundamentally to do the work that I do. Because, it's great if we can produce outcomes ourselves, but if we really want to be able to guide people, we need to understand how the body works, right? We can't be taking a plug and play approach. And so, I've been practicing functional medicine now for coming up on 12 years. It's such a joy, to me. Health is the foundational essential that allows us to fully bring our gifts to the world. And to me, that's what it's really all about.
That's excellent. By the way, I don't know if you have a control over this. Your microphone has a little tiny bit of distortion to it. If you can bring the volume down just like 1 notch, it doesn't have to come down by a lot.
Oh, you know what? I think I had it hidden
you had
in
it
my
buried.
little
You had it
zip
buried.
run.
Ah.
Or is that much better? Does that make a difference?
We'll have to give it a moment to
Okay.
recover because it was further away from your mouth, so the volume came way down.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Let me know.
right around there is pretty good. I mean,
good.
That's not comfortable
Perfect.
necessarily because you have
It's
to kind
fine.
of hold it there. But.
It's okay.
Well, okay. So I like what you had to say about what led you into functional medicine. It actually made me think about something that I've been working on up until about. I've always been very, very healthy. I was divorced a couple of years ago, and after that, I was very unhealthy in my eating for quite some time. But I stopped that. But about 6 to 8 months ago, I started experiencing a kind of a chronic headache thing for the first time in my life. Went to the MD. The MD had nothing for me. So I went to an ND, and the ND did have some stuff, and she was leading me through some nutritional changes and so forth. Not all of which were actually working out. And so I kind of was thinking about what it was that she had been guiding me to do and where could I be looking on my own between visits, because my next visit wasn't scheduled to the end of October, where I could be looking myself to try to improve things. And I realized something that I want to get your commentary on.
Yeah.
Whenever we were looking at stuff that's nutritionally based, it seems to me that medicine, both mainstream and alternative medicine, tends to treat nutritionals as generic averages rather than here's what's going on with you and your particular consumption. And the reason I say that is, the ND is leading me through, she's kind of guiding me to what they call the Mediterranean diet and shifting over to those kinds of foodstuffs and so forth. But basic things like RDAs,
Yeah,
the
recommend
the
daily
recommended
allowance.
daily allowances, they almost seem to be something that they call it recommended daily allowance, but it seems more like it's recommended weekly allowance or recommended monthly allowance. They kind of like take the average over time, and they kind of assume, well, if you're doing these foods, you're eating these kinds of things, then overall it's kind of balancing out to the right RDA. And I said, I wonder if that's true.
Mm.
So I started creating a little spreadsheet to track it, and I started getting these really weird answers to my own food intake. So I said, okay, I got to turn this into a program. So I turned it into a Python program where I could literally plug in the foods that I'm eating and have it calculate the RDA for like 30 different nutrients.
Awesome.
And to my amazement, I found that what my ND and I had been working on, I really wasn't deficient on, but I was deficient on stuff that we hadn't even talked about.
Great. Yeah.
And so it kind of raised the thought in my mind. I mean, do you, as a functional medicine person, do you find that we're kind of making assumptions about what people are intaking rather than actually finding out what they're intaking?
Yes, absolutely. I do. And there are a few different ways I go about addressing that. One is most people, not everyone, but most people really come to the conversation about nutrition saying I eat pretty healthy. There's some people who will say, not true. Like you shared, shortly after your divorce, you're like, yeah, it wasn't the
Oh, I
best.
went way off
Right,
the wagon.
right. Okay, you were off the wagon, off the rails, right? But mostly people come to that conversation saying, no, I eat healthy, and believe they do. But a few different things I do to really tease out what's going on, because this is not a conversation of good or bad or morality, right? We want to understand what's going on so we can support the healing of the body.
Right.
So I actually have people track, not for just a day or 3 days or even a week. I have people track their nutrition for at least a month and oftentimes longer than that, because it helps me understand where some of the either deficiencies, insufficiencies, or just simply put reactions might be coming from. And then even beyond that, I do lab tests, right? I call it data-driven natural medicine because I really don't throw darts, right? I test nutrients. I test to see, are we how is your magnesium, right? Because even if you, Walt, are eating foods high in magnesium, doesn't mean you're absorbing them correctly.
True.
And it also doesn't mean that your genetic needs aren't different, right? So there are people who, just simply put, given by changes in enzymes and a variety of other factors, they may just need more of a certain nutrient than the average Joe or Jill, right? So when we get those numbers, we can be more targeted. We can start to shift the focus, nutrition, supplementation, maybe a combination. And then we go back, and obviously, like in your case, I would expect headaches to resolve, but also I would expect over time, if we check those numbers, we should see them moving.
Which makes sense. Yeah. One of the things that it has done for me to do this exercise of creating my own computer program and so forth is I've had to dive into what the different nutrients are, and come to find out I seem to be pretty consistently deficient in boron and choline. I didn't even know that boron was a nutrient.
Yeah, right. That's awesome. And the other thing you're pointing to in that, Walt, is something I love, is like that you are actually learning about your body,
Yeah,
right?
I tend to
Because
do that. Yeah.
oftentimes when people learn about their body, they develop just naturally. It's like you can't help but develop a sense of wonder and almost reverence for this like amazing thing that's our home, right? In which case it becomes even more compelling to look for opportunities to care for it better. Just like anything you have that you revere and you appreciate and you're grateful for, you're probably going to treat it pretty well.
Well, I think they kind of go hand in hand. If you're
Yes.
that inquisitive, you're already treating it well, and if you're treating it
Yeah.
well, you're that inquisitive. I mean, you really
Right.
can't do one without the other, I don't think.
Yeah, that's true. That is true.
Not
It's
that people don't try.
yeah, right.
Yeah. In fact, the other thing that's really fascinating to me, because I was trying to deal with a chronic headache situation, is as I started delving into the different nutrients, I have my program set up so that I can enter a food and enter the different elements of the food. Let's say I have oatmeal with milk and banana, so I plug in all those three things, and then it calculates live for me, showing me where I'm doing with all the different nutrients. It was amazing to me, for instance, to see that, as I'm going through the day, everything is below the RDA until I finally get down to the end of the day. And now I'm finally catching up on some of them. And then I wasn't catching up on all of them. And then I look at what I did the next day, and the next day's menu was off in other different ways.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, wow, this is really not only interesting, it's also kind of confusing because they call it an RDA, a recommended daily allowance.
Right.
And yet day to day, it bounces all over the frigging place.
Yeah. Yeah. There's going to be some variation for sure.
And we're not talking small amounts of variation.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're talking major, and we're talking about situations where, like, today the foods that I eat, the B vitamins or all the range of B vitamins, I'm getting like 200 or 300% what I normally need. But the A, C, and D are way low. And then the next day it flips around. It's like, whoa, what's going on here?
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
really,
and I'm curious to know with the research you've been doing, are your headaches diminished?
Somewhat. I haven't gotten as far as I want to get to. I've
Okay.
only had the program running now for about a week and a half.
Okay.
In terms of my computer program. Now, I've been
Yeah.
doing what the ND had me doing since mid-August.
Yeah.
But I kind of concluded that really wasn't working out well, which is why I led to creating this program. It took me a while to write the program, and it's still kind of in development. But it functions. It works well enough that I can use it. So I really only have about a week to 10 days worth of data to work with. But in that week to 10 days, among other things, I looked at the supplements because, like many people had supplements. I looked at my supplements and they weren't helping me with the boron or the choline. So I had to go order supplements for boron and choline so I could kind of fill that in. And that does seem to be helping. It hasn't gotten me to the point where I feel like, yes, I've got the thing answered.
Yeah.
But I feel like I'm making progress. And from what little I've been able to find about them, they can actually take a couple weeks before they start to show up as a shift.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely giving it a few weeks. And then also I would say, oftentimes it's not just one thing, right? So you may notice that over 3 to 4 weeks, the headaches are diminished, but if they're not completely gone, it's like, okay, well then there's something else going on. Maybe you have an underlying food sensitivity or,
that was something else the ND had. She did some food sensitivity tests on me.
Okay.
That's why I found out that I good thing I don't drink coffee because I'm highly sensitive to it.
Yeah. Okay.
But the tough one was egg. I had no idea I had an egg sensitivity.
Which is also a good source of choline. So,
yeah,
tricky one.
Yeah. Like, well, wait a minute. You can't take that away from me. That's not fair.
Right.
And I also found out my brother had the same sensitivities I had. We had not talked to each other. We had not told each other.
Interesting.
So we both had the egg sensitivity. We both had the coffee. We both had blueberry. So there's a definite genetic side going on there.
Yeah.
And yet he also told me that he went off the egg and then he went back onto it and he didn't notice a difference.
He did not. Yeah.
Really?
And sometimes food sensitivities can self-resolve. And to me, that is important, right? If we're going to have you pull out of food and kind of become a bit of like an acrobat when you eat at certain moments, we want it to be for good reason, right? And so, I would say I don't do food sensitivity tests often. Oftentimes we tease it out with the tracking and the symptoms and things like that. But there are times where they can be really helpful.
Yeah. But it just really goes to show how complex this kind of thing is. Because like you say, it's not just one thing. One thing can make a difference. It can help. And I mean, when I was eating really badly after my divorce, I was eating high sodium levels without realizing it. And I took a look, I was like, whoa, okay, a little bit of intake going on here. So I made some shifts there and it helped. The shifts did help, but they didn't solve the problem. So it kind of illustrates that's just one little piece of a larger puzzle.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So this is challenging stuff. I like the fact that it's data driven, especially in the age of data. I mean, that's the era that we live in, the 21st century. The one thing that I always wonder about, though, where data is concerned, is data has a lot to do with how you decide to interpret it. People kind of forget that part about science. People think that science is just perfectly logical, and there's some logic to science, but a lot of it is intuitive. A lot of it is just, here's my theory, I'm going to test it out. They kind of skip that part. But
yeah, absolutely. And even to the point where what you're speaking to, well, is like someone will come to me with labs they've just completed, right? And according to their, like more traditional physician, they're quote unquote fine,
right? And yeah, they're fine in the sense that there's no imminent threat to their life, right? That is true,
Which
right?
is the way medical science,
Right,
modern medicine looks
exactly.
at stuff. Yeah, if you're not
Exactly.
dying, then they don't want you.
Exactly. But, like this person, maybe I'm thinking of someone in particular who, for her, she's exhausted and, she's in her early 30s and she's a gal on the go, but she's unreasonably tired. And one of the things we teased out is in her, what's called a complete blood count, a CBC, which is really looking at white blood cells and red blood cells. We teased out that she has a chronic infection going on. And this is just
Mm.
looking at a standard lab panel that, she'd had done. Yeah, no, she doesn't have a raging infection. She has a chronic infection, though. And it is really, it's taken its toll. So we're going after it. And, it'll take a couple of weeks, but it will make a difference. And these are the little things, to your point, where her doctor tested her thyroid. Her thyroid's working great, which is wonderful, but also she's still tired, exhausted, right?
Yeah.
So there's some other stuff going on there.
Yeah, actually, my MD kind of pissed me off, to be perfectly honest, because when I brought this up to her, her response was that I was healthy, healthy, healthy. That was the quote.
Yeah.
And also that the headaches I was encountering, particularly I would notice it, if I bent over quickly. She says, "Well, you're 67 years old. This is to be expected when you get into your 60s. That's just part of growing old like that." And I said, "Okay, yeah." And I walked there and I said, "Okay, well, we're going to throw that piece of information out the door. 'Cause that's
Truly.
useless. It's not even true."
Yeah.
So yeah, that kind of, well, that fits my prejudice. I'm definitely prejudiced against mainstream medicine. There's no doubt about it. And
Same.
that just kind of fed that prejudice. But it also kind of fueled me like, well, all right, since mainstream medicine can't tell me or refuses to tell me, depending on how you put it, what can alternative medicine tell me instead? And so that's how I ended up with the ND. And it's kind of put me onto a journey. That journey is more like me trying to understand what's going on.
Yes.
And which is kind of tough because, I mean, compared to people like you who are highly trained in this, I'm the least qualified person to figure that out. And yet, in some ways, I'm the most qualified because it's my body.
Right. No, that's really well said. And I will say, like when I work with people, I tell them it's like you are taking a course on your body. Right. And, the word doctor, it comes from the Latin word docere, which means to teach. Right. And so to me, I really see my job as being a teacher, helping you understand how is your body working and, whatever we're using to heal your body. Why are we reaching for that? What is the actual physiological and biological shift we expect to see that you're going to notice in the way you feel, right? Or it's going to show up in your labs or maybe a combination of it. But yeah, to me, it's important to do our best to understand our bodies.
Hey, I just learned another Latin word today too. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah. How much of this is resonating with you, Anne-Marie? Because I know you've been dealing with your own stuff lately, but I'm just kind of curious to know what's catching your attention.
Yeah, I completely agree with just knowing your own body and just learning more about stuff. I mean, I've said previously that, I'm now working with a trainer to like to build my muscle, build my strength, build my balance. And now it's learning the basics of food and the kind of foods that you need to eat and portion control and things like that. And there is, you kind of realize, oh, I'm not getting this. And certainly like in the UK, vitamin D I've started taking because, we don't get a lot of it over here. We don't get a lot of sunshine. So yeah, I think understanding the supplements that my body needs, and it's exactly as you say, you have to play with it. Does this make me feel better? And I can certainly feel in the last few weeks, even though I've been really quite poorly, that I've come out of it and my energy levels are higher. So I also know like to work with my body and not just sit down and do nothing, but just keep my body moving. So I think, yeah, exactly what you said. It's knowing your body, knowing your triggers, and keep doing the stuff that does work for you.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. And, with those, I think it can be helpful, like to go back to grounded in numbers, to get your labs done. You do want to notice in how you notice how you feel, but also making sure, right? Okay, is this where we want to be with those numbers? And, understanding, just continuing to peel the onion to see if there's some residual symptoms. What What is at the source of it? Nutrients for some, inflammation for others, chronic infections for somebody else, right? I mean, they're the same symptoms can show up, can be, like the root of the same symptom can be so many different things, right? And so it really is understanding your body and how it's working.
You mentioned a key word, inflammation. That seems to be a hot topic these days among people who are talking about their own medical situations or referring to experts who have written books or put out courses and all that kind of thing. It's all about, oh yeah, we gotta defeat the inflammation. I mean, I think it's true. Certainly, inflammation is, it's going to be playing a key role. But the thought that also goes through my mind is, well, yeah, but what's creating the inflammation in the first place? What's the underlying cause behind it?
Yeah. And that's when we start to, okay, is it a chronic infection? Is it a reaction to certain foods? Is it just fundamentally speaking that what you're putting in your body is pro-inflammatory, right? Is it, there are a lot of different possible explanations, but yes, seeking out and working to break that vicious cycle of inflammation is definitely, it's a big part of the work that I do, in particular for people who are dealing with energy related concerns or weight related concerns or hormonal concerns, to name just a few, right? These are all things that, inflammation isn't a good thing for much unless it's acute inflammation, right? Acute controlled inflammation is actually part of the healing process. So when someone gets sick, if someone gets injured, inflammation should be short-term controlled and resolved naturally, because that inflammation actually serves to communicate to the cells of your body, hey, this needs attention. Come on in here, handle this, right? Whether it's an infection or an injury. And that's appropriate. That's an appropriate inflammatory response. But when it's inflammation gone wild, right, it's not resolving and it's prolonged over a period, that's when it becomes the fertilizer for all things bad. And we don't have to guess about it. Right? We can test inflammation. We can test it. There are a lot of different ways, but some of the go-to ways that I test it are with HSCRP, high sensitivity C-reactive protein is what that stands for. And another one I'll test often is homocysteine. If we're looking specifically in the digestive tract, there's things like lactoferrin and calprotectin and a few other things that we might look at. But, actually, looking at is there an inflammation problem here? And then, like you said, Walt, if there is, what's at the source of it?
Part of the problem, I would think, is trying to define what inflammation is. I mean, you started to do that by saying, well, there's we'll call it the good inflammation and the bad inflammation. Mm-hmm. Although I'm a little bit wary of that, because that's how we end up with good cholesterol and bad cholesterol. But
I would say useful and not useful.
Okay, that's better. I like that. Yeah. So useful inflammation and non-useful inflammation, or useless inflammation. No, it doesn't work.
Yeah, right.
Anyway,
yeah.
but whatever phrasing we choose to use there, it's still an interesting question to try to identify. Well, what do we mean by an inflammation? Because from what I understand about inflammation, I mean, if I see inflammation on my skin, for instance, I see redness, which tells me there's blood going there, and
exactly.
And there's some kind of there's an attack going on, and there's the body defending itself, and so forth. And that's what I think about when I think about inflammation. But is that what a medical person?
Yeah. Well, so I mean, so I named some of the different ways we can measure inflammation, right? HSCRP, homocysteine. Another one called ESR, some specific to the digestive tract. But fundamentally, what inflammation is, it's chemical mediators that are calling the body to respond, and in particular, the immune system. And, pointing to a problem in a chemical way. The chemicals are the ones that are the pointers, right? Mm-hmm. And then with that, like you were saying, Walt, that leads to blood vessels dilating and blood coming into the area. You see the redness, right? There's more blood flow there. And with that blood is bringing in white blood cells. And those white blood cells are part of the immune system and looking to clean up cellular debris that's been injured or attack an invader. So, inflammation, it is a complex process, but we do have a good understanding of of some really good measurements of it fundamentally. Yeah.
And not just hopefully understanding it, also having an idea of what to use it for, how to use the understanding of it.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
It's a warning flag, but it's also just a flag. It's an indicator. It tells you something is happening here.
Right. There, it's the canary.
It's the canary. Yes. Yes. Welcome to the coal mine.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Uh-huh.
What are some of the other canaries that you look for, though?
Well, I mean, ultimately beyond inflammation, right? I mean, it might be a nutrient deficiency or insufficiency. It might be increased toxic load, which would quite possibly ignite inflammation. So it might be a root cause of inflammation. And interestingly enough, a lot of these are related because when there are nutrient deficiencies or insufficiencies, our detoxification pathways can't work well. Because those enzymes that run our detoxification pathways require certain nutrients. They require B vitamins and they require amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins, and they require certain antioxidants. So all of these things that are necessary to run these detox pathways, if they're not present, it can show up in, it can show up in a lot of different ways, but even just fundamentally leading with more toxins in the body than the body's able to process. Or that I would say that's in interfering with our ability to produce energy, whether that's by way of the toxins interfering with our energy production, because they will do that. They will impact our body's ability to make ATP. And so, those are some of the common things I look at. Also, in overreactive immune system, whether it's around reacting to certain foods or autoimmune diseases, or creating it can be a core part of that hypervigilance and that inflammation when the immune system is overreactive. It can also show up as a histamine intolerance when the mast cells, which are the types of immune cells that are in charge of producing histamines. Most people have heard of antihistamines like Benadryl, right? Histamines are part of an inflammatory response. And more I'm encountering people with histamine problems. Mast cell activation syndrome is a common one, but just overall, just difficulty processing histamines. So those are some of the things that I'm looking at when I work with people.
Processing histamines. That's not something that was normally part of my lexicon. Like you said, antihistamine, that's the one that we normally think about. I'm reacting to something that's in the air. I got to take my antihistamine so I can stop sneezing. That's about as far as we go with it.
Yeah.
But it's actually a lot more than that.
Yeah, I mean, our cells themselves produce histamine. Histamine, again, is a chemical we produce that leads to the runny nose and the itchy and the redness and all those different things, right? So what can happen for people is their cells can be overly enthusiastic to produce histamines, and their body can be compromised in their ability to drain histamine. So you can kind of think about it like a tub where the water that's coming into the tub is the histamine levels. And maybe the water is turned up, so more is flowing into the tub, and maybe the drain is clogged. And when those both coexist, the water is going to overflow and people are going to have symptoms, whether it's showing up as eczema. For some people, it shows up as anxiousness can be a kind of one of the side effects of histamine intolerance. For some people, it's, kind of nerve pain related. I'd say that's a little bit less common. But the histamine conundrum is a growing phenomenon I've seen.
One thing that we talk about a lot here on the variety of topics that we address here on this program, which is pretty much everything in life. So you can imagine how broad it is. But one of the things we talk about a lot is mindset. And you kind of
Yeah.
touched upon that a moment ago when you talked about anxiety as being one of the aspects that are involved with histamine production. Talk about your perspective on the connection between mindset and health of the body.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I think it's so big. So big. Right. I think, for people to navigate this arena, it's actually it's the first place I really start.
Hmm.
I, I, I start in the first conversation I have with people. Yes, I'm getting all the information about their body and their symptoms and their health history and their family health history. But one of the things we step into is what I call authoring your vision of vitality for your health and your life. And to me, this really is an essential to do this work because we don't buy what we do, we buy why we do it. Right. And so the self authorship of one's intention gets people connected to not just their what, but their why. And, to me, this is already in them. This vision of vitality is already in them, and they're just bringing life to it. And, I start by doing a little bit of a 5-year time traveling exercise. And so, for any of you listening out there, you might pause and do this after I share a little bit about what you're going to be doing. But, it's time traveling to the 5-year future and envisioning a future where your health and vitality is as you intend and desire they occur. And then you're actually telling the story of what it is to be you with your health thriving in this 5-year future. What is it like for you to get out of bed and move about your day? And, who are you able to be for yourself and for others and in this world? And it's so beautiful to see people get connected to this possibility. And this is the first step in this authorship, but it really is an essential first step. And when people start, what that makes available is as we journey, right? And no journey is going to be straight that I've encountered yet personally, right? Yeah. And so being really clear on your personal what and your why, it's like you've got this North Star and you're able to navigate, maybe you zigzag, left and right, but you're clear what your compass is and you keep moving towards it. And, to me, it's kind of a bit of a magical phenomenon that when we're clear on our, I call it your vision of vitality for your health and your life, but you also might hear in that your intention. And when we're clear and connected to our intention, the universe does collaborate with us in a magical way.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing that I've commented on, made reference to numerous times here on the show. My sister-in-law recently got her PhD in statistics, but before that she was pursuing it in the neurosciences, and she's kind of switched at the last moment. So she did a lot of neuroscience related activities in pursuit of that. And she commented to me one time on the program many years ago that given all the different ways we can hook somebody up to various kinds of scopes and so forth in a laboratory, if we hook all the stuff up that we knew how to hook up to monitor every single system of the body, we can literally detect from the moment that somebody thinks a thought what's happening at an injury site or an illness site or whatever within the body. And she even cited, I think she said it was a 90-second cycle, so that 90 seconds after you have the thought, you can actually detect that there's healing going on or that there's injury going on, depending on which kind of thought it was. If it was a positive thought, it would heal. If it's a negative thought, it would actually start killing the body off. And I was blown away by that claim when she made it. And it really brought home for me just how powerful, not just in the broad long-term intention is, but the daily minute-by-minute intention is.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of curious. I mean, you're shaking your head up and down, so I'm kind of thinking you're going to have a cool answer here. But do you incorporate this in any way in your practice?
I would say from the standpoint of having people be connected, first of all, self-author their vision of vitality, but also honor a ritual of being connected to it. So it becomes the home base that people come back to throughout their days. And so in that way, it does shift things.
Yeah. I've continued to be amazed at how responsive the body is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I even notice it with my own testing that I'm doing, trying to identify what nutrients I'm depleted on. So as soon as I started taking the boron and choline supplements just a couple days ago, I felt an improvement right there. It's like really quick. And,
Yeah, that's great.
I mean, it's not solved yet, but to have responsiveness that quick is.
Yeah.
There's an encouraging, especially for people living in the modern 21st century where we want everything instantly, that instant gratification thing. So it's nice to have something that actually gratifies instantly.
It is true.
Makes you feel like you're on the right track.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah. But that also, I would think, now I'm kind of speculating here because I'm definitely talking about a field I don't really know well. I would kind of think that also creates a bit of a conundrum, because there are going to be times when the body is giving you mixed signals. And so how do you sort out the mixed signals? Yeah, you're getting an instant response, but it seems so similar to the last response that you had because they're mixed. And how do you sort that? That's where it becomes confusing, trying to kind of figure your own stuff out. And I think that's where the value of the data-driven medicine comes in.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Yeah. We go back to the numbers, but we also, just like you're staying curious, like we stay curious about what's at the source of this, right? I'm thinking of a woman in particular right now who she is dealing with some histamine overload things. And for her body's just taken a little bit longer to heal than I would have expected. And people who I've worked with in similar situations have had less setbacks, but she's had a few, and each time we've learned something new, right? We learned at one point that gums like xanthan gum and those kind of thickeners that are commonly added to foods, not typically where we need to go with people, right? Oftentimes, bodies often have a little more resilience than that, but not hers, right? She was we kind of homed it after she was tracking beautifully. So that really helped me help her. And, through her tracking, we were able to tease out that these different gums were, fundamentally leading to these eczema flares. So pulling that out was a big help for her. But along the way, it's been, one thing, adding little pieces of the puzzle one at a time. So part of it is just staying curious and continuing to look at how the body is responding, whether that's in symptoms or in labs, or ideally in a combination.
And the other thing that I've noted, my ND actually pointed this out at one point, because I can't remember exactly what it was, but there was something where I was responding the opposite of what the norm would say would happen.
Yeah.
The norm said, well, people on average have this kind of response, and I was having the diametric opposite response.
Yeah. What comes to mind when you say that, Walt, is something like magnesium. Right. Magnesium for 98% of people will produce a pretty predictable response. But then there are 2% who you're like, yeah, sorry, I can't really explain it, but I can see that it's real, right?
Well, that also, what occurs to me is that also makes it challenging, because again, if you're doing data-driven medicine, you're also comparing it to averages. I mean, that's just going to be the nature of it. But what if somebody doesn't fit the average? And I imagine that's kind of that teasing out process you're talking about. At some point, you have to say, okay, the averages have only taken us so far. What can we learn about the way your body reacts?
Absolutely. Yeah. And, it is fun being a part of this work with people, in the sense that people get to know themselves on a whole new level, right? There are people who sometimes I work with, people who they've devoted their time and attention to other things for the last decades, right? They're excelling professionally. They're amazing, parents, or, just CEO, or whatever, wherever it is they've been giving their time, attention, and energy. And they're now just kind of waking up to like, holy cow, I've got this body I need to take care of. Right. And so being part of that kind of like awakening and starting to notice, and, the aha moments that come with it it's so fun to see and guide in that process.
I think we kind of figure that out when things start failing, and then it's suddenly, oh, I need to look after this. I need to pay attention to it.
Right.
But I was wondering, what happens when other factors come into your body? Because I think for me personally, just going through menopause, and that is just literally, I feel like I don't know my body or my mind anymore. It's just such a change and such a journey.
Yeah. No, I mean, and that's a great example of like you're stepping into a new era, like legitimately speaking, physiologically speaking, right? And so how do we help you feel your best as physiology changes? And so I start to think about, in that situation, a few different things. One is our sex hormones and how they're functioning are intimately related to our stress response. And when we're talking about how to support healthy hormone function, we need to make sure we're looking at what is going on with the sex hormones, but also what is going on with that stress response and the adrenals. And we can again do that with testing, but we can also look at what are some of the common stressors that can throw that out of balance.
Right.
When our body is stressed and on a physiological level, mostly we think about stress and in terms of, our emotional stressors. And of course that those are real stressors, but our body knows stress that our mind doesn't, right? So people can be walking around not feeling stressed, but their body is actually quite stressed. And, how I would define stress is anything that causes your adrenals and to produce cortisol. Cortisol is our primary stress hormone. And so we can start to go through, okay, what are the things that can cause the body to produce cortisol that we're able to control? We're not going to be able to control everything, right? But we can control our blood sugar, right? We can do the best we can to ensure we're getting restful sleep so that melatonin, cortisol shift back and forth as we move throughout our days is occurring naturally. And, we can look at, again, just going back to certain, if inflammation's elevated, our body's going to be producing cortisol as an anti-inflammatory mechanism, sort of, right? So there are different ways we can support the hormones simply by supporting the adrenals. And the reason why they're so connected is both our sex hormones, by sex hormones, I mean estrogens. There are many different types of estrogen. Our progesterone, our testosterone, they all get produced by way of one fundamental backbone, and that backbone is cholesterol. So cholesterol gets turned into all of our sex hormones, and it also gets turned into cortisol. But our body, when faced with a biological choice, will make cortisol over sex hormones because you need cortisol to stay alive. And you do not need to procreate or feel sexy or have beautiful hair or, all the things we want, right? You don't need those to stay alive. So, doing what we can to support our adrenals will allow our body to use just the raw resources in a more evenly distributed manner. And then, beyond that, again, we talked a little bit about that ball and mitt sort of situation of our hormones. Our hormones are, for our hormones to work well, we need to produce them. And we also need to receive the message of those hormones. So we can look at okay, do we have a sticky enough mitt? Right? These are things like omega-3 fatty acids. These are things like making sure inflammation is down because that will interfere with the mitt, how sticky that mitt is, our vitamin D levels, right? So there are lots of, exercise is going to support our sex hormones. And then, there are certainly some adaptogens that can be useful for that as well. One of my favorite adaptogens for perimenopausal women is maca. And there's one specific maca supplement in particular. I'm not on their board. I don't have any, financial affiliation with them, but it's called Feminescence Pro. And they have 3 different versions, one for women who are menstruating, one who are, making the shift in the, towards menopause. They're in the perimenopausal era of their life. And then people who are postmenopausal. But that maca in particular really doesn't add any hormones to the body. It just helps the body produce them and receive the message to the best of its ability. It's kind of like greasing the wheel of communication. So those are, some different things I think about for the many women who I'm working with who are like, oh my gosh, what is going on here? Right.
Mm. Yeah, Anne-Marie's just nodding her head up and down. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
minefields, and it's very difficult because, like you say, a lot of this is knowing your body and understanding it, and then you go through something where you just don't recognize what's going on at all. You don't recognize yourself or your body, so it is a minefield.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it sounds like you're doing great work to tease out what's going on for you.
Yeah, no, I feel good. I feel good now. So
Good. Yeah.
It's good stuff. I'm also kind of curious about a couple other things. One thing that I'm curious about is because we have this tendency as a society to kind of go after what the latest hot topic is, medically speaking, rather than delve into the depths of it. We kind of miss a lot of stuff. I've made this comment many times in the last 5 or 6 months. I've really come to love AI because AI can really help me get to the root of something quickly. I want to know more about I didn't even know what boron did in the body. So I asked, what does boron do? It gives you a whole readout of what boron does. Like, oh man, this is so much better than Googling. I love this. But as I dive into it, I'm also beginning to realize that, first of all, the depth of what you guys have to go into when you're putting stuff together, when you're acquiring your degrees, doing your learning and so forth, as well as participating in your practice and the learning that you do that way, because it's an ongoing learning process. But the intricacies of how the body not only interacts within itself, but also how it responds. You made reference a moment ago to the correlation between melatonin and cortisol. And I think most of us have thought about cortisol and heard about cortisol as, as well as fight or flight. That's all it is really good for. But you're kind of pointing to, well, it also has other benefits too. We don't hear about other benefits for cortisol.
Oh yeah. I mean, cortisol is essential for us to be alive. You are not alive if you're not producing cortisol, like actually, right? And so cortisol, it's like anything else, like the Goldilocks world, right? Too much, too little, not ideal. Just right. That's great, right? But it works on a circadian rhythm, right? Our melatonin and our cortisol, they're kind of on a teeter-totter. You're not going to have both high at the same time. Like they can't coexist at the high levels at the same time, right? So when you're sleeping, your cortisol should be at its lowest. And when you wake up, it should be at its highest, right? And so melatonin on the flip side should be at its highest when we're sleeping, and should be, coming down when we wake up. It should be pretty low when we wake up. So they kind of are in this dance. And so, it's not so surprising when people are super stressed that they might experience challenges with sleep, right? Because they just cannot get that cortisol. They can't tap it down. And so, they're all, of course, there are 1,000,001 different possible ways to go about tackling that. But I think most people can relate to that experience of stressful times and sleep being disrupted in some way, shape, or form.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Relate to it. They have to deal with it. What are you talking about relating to it?
Right.
That's just part of the
Hopefully
day-to-day
not very
existence.
often though.
Well, if you had trouble sleeping on a particular night, then you're having to deal with it right there.
Yeah, totally.
It doesn't even have to be a chronic sleeping situation. It can be just that one night.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then the next day you're dragging through the day. Oh God.
Yeah, definitely.
But it shows just how all this stuff just really affects us in ways that I mean the popular conversation really misses it, I think.
Yeah.
The popular conversation it touches on the highlight stuff that is easily turned into something marketable that somebody marketed a book or a pill about or something like that.
Yeah, I will. And to your point, Wald, I always think it's hilarious when there will be like a trend, right? People, maybe 6 months ago, maybe a little bit longer now, people started asking me about colostrum, right? Colostrum being the first milk produced by mammals that has extra antibodies and certainly has some benefits. But it was just like at first I was just like, oh, okay, they just wanted to know, they heard about it. And so I told them about it. And then the next person asked, and then the next person asked, and I was like, okay, who is on social media singing about colostrum right now?
Yeah.
Right. And I found the culprit and I looked up their product and it's way overpriced and not that great. But it's like, okay.
Yeah, that's the way it often goes. It's true. the thing that goes along with it is that because we have this, oh, I don't want to denigrate it. That we have this ongoing stream of information. Let's put it that way.
Yes.
That just is feeding us on our fears primarily, which,
Oh,
by the way,
yeah.
is where most of modern medicine is associated as well. It's based on the fears.
Absolutely.
So we have essentially fear-driven. I don't want to call it healthcare because it's actually not. It's fear-driven sickness care.
Yeah.
And it raises the question that I've tried to raise a few times here on the program and gotten interesting answers each time. I'm going to raise it with you. What exactly do you think real health care is?
I think real health care, actually, if I could just, begin to write a new script for how it would go for all of us, is it would be a process of engagement, right? People would actually begin at a pretty young age to get clear on their definition of what health is. And again, there would be a partnership, a conversational partnership and guiding between the person who, let's call them the professional, and the individual who's engaging their help. Right. And so people would learn along the way. Can you just imagine if all of us beginning at, let's call it 8 years old, just, our annual, or maybe we decide it's biannual appointment with the doctor was really more about educating us about our body and in an age appropriate manner, right? And in conversational appropriate manner. And just over time, how that would shift the way people care for their bodies and I think in the long run, it would really shift health trajectory. Not to mention that if we changed the environment people are living in, I mean, Anne-Marie, you know how it is. Like in Europe, people are pretty much healthier than people in the US. I mean, as a whole, right? There's more walking, there's more things are just right. I mean, the world is just constructed.
Yeah,
right?
that shocked me because I was over in the States in the summer and people just didn't walk. We were the only people we saw walking was ourselves.
Yes, exactly. My husband, Chris, likes to joke in the US, we like to get in the car to go to our refrigerator. Right. And it's true now that we've had this like fabulous taste of living in Europe. When we're back here, we'll be walking. We were in Phoenix for a conference and we walked out to dinner and people were looking at us like we had 3 heads. I mean, it was like, a lovely night and half a mile walk. It wasn't that far, right? It's like, come on, guys. And there was a sidewalk. There was, like all the things you need to walk to dinner.
It's true. It's true. In fact, to the point now where walking is a specific activity that you do rather than something that you do as part of your day-to-day life.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, I think that it would be, we could do a remodel of the way this US is constructed. That would be a big deal, a big useful deal.
I would like that. Yeah. I like the way that you framed it, that it's a conversation that goes on. I think one thing that happened, particularly here in the US, although it really applies throughout the Western world, over the last century, we kind of put doctors on a pedestal. We said, well, the doctor is the guardian of our health. We basically gave the power over to the doctor, and we're still dealing with that. There's a fallout that's coming from that goes on to this day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I noticed that, Walt, too, is, sometimes people who engage my guidance will initially come in almost like understandable, like a little bit PTSD from their past healthcare experiences. Right. And it takes some time for me to earn their trust. And I mean, that's okay. I mean, as long as they're willing to get there, I'm willing to earn it. Right. But it is understandable.
And it's also challenging because if you put the doctor on the pedestal, that means you're no longer responsible for your own health.
100%. Yeah. And that I will say, when I meet with people, if I'm doing a complimentary consultation and someone says to me, how are you going to get me better? I'm like, well, we're not going to be a match. This is not going to
This is a real short consultation.
Exactly.
But it's not going to work.
I bid you well. Yes.
That if we could actually get our overall health system, or even, it doesn't even have to be a system, our tendencies. I don't even care if it's a single system. I think probably there's a lot of problems associated with a system that are getting in the way. But if we could just get our overall health practice over to the point where it is now that kind of dialogue you're talking about, that would reflect so many different ways in a different setup. Like I'm trying so hard to not say the word system. I don't know if you noticed that. Yeah.
And I would also add to that, go back to how it was before the 90s when pharmaceutical companies, et cetera, couldn't advertise direct to consumers.
Why do you think that's different?
They couldn't until the 90s. They couldn't advertise direct to consumer until the 90s. And if you turn on any TV show, it's like someone's trying to sell you some kind of medication, or it's like, and so that it is fundamentally, it's pressing that button of fear, right? It's putting it in people's conscious that something's wrong. They can't trust their body. There's something wrong with their body. Their body's going to betray them. Right. And like, listen, things happen to the body that need attention. I'm not trying to pretend that's not true, but I don't think it's been very helpful. If we look at the 90s to now, our health as a whole has not moved in the right direction in the Western world, especially in the United States, but as a whole.
See, now what you just did is you did something we often do. You touched on a topic that could give us another hour to talk, and we don't have.
Yeah, right.
That's not fair.
We'll do that another time.
In the meantime, we need to wrap this one up. So let's touch on a few things. First of all, for someone who wants to reach out and perhaps even consider a consultation with you, how do they reach out to you? How do they find you?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you can find me at wellempowered.com. And you'll find a place where you can schedule a complimentary consultation. And if you make sure you let me know where you heard about me, then if you do decide to move ahead and working together, you will be gifted 10% off. Yeah. And if you're someone who you're just not sure, but you'd like a little more information, I have a secret place on my website and it's wellempowered.com/dare. DARE. And if you sign up for that, you're going to receive a weekly dare with a little micro habit to practice for a week, to kind of look at, okay, what happens in my body when I make this little shift.
Okay, so you can't just tease us. You guys give us a little bit more than that. Like, give us one example.
I'll give you one. The dare this week, they go out on Sundays. Yesterday's dare was for this week, and this week only a promise for 1 week. Don't eat directly out of a bag. So whether it's chips or nuts or granola, take your portion and put it on a bowl or put it on a plate. And if you go back for seconds, that's fine. Just do the same thing. Put it in a bowl, put it on a plate. And this week, as you do that, just what do you notice?
Interesting. I would have trouble with that one, actually, because I don't eat anything out of a bag. But I can understand why that would be a valuable exercise to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think
it's so easy just to go like that and that and that and try and get to the end of it, isn't it? So yeah, you're actually thinking about what you're eating.
Yes.
And that's what happens when you start tracking your own nutrients, by the way. You think about it a lot.
Yes.
Well, I'm kind of almost to the point where I'm thinking, am I thinking about this too much? Am I overthinking this stuff? I mean, you can kind of go that far, really. You can
for sure. You can become, I mean, it's good that you're tuned into that. I would, perhaps give yourself an end date to when you're going to be diligently tracking, and when you're done with that, honor that end date.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good idea. Another question for you. You told us how we can find you, and we'll make sure we'll include in the show notes the link to the website and so forth. And you very generously, I mean, especially anything with health related, there are dollars involved. It's not
Yeah.
cheap no matter what kind of thing you're looking at. So at 10% off, that's a really nice gift that you're giving. But beyond that, for somebody who just wants to have a conversation, I mean, do you welcome people to just have a conversation?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. You can schedule a complimentary consultation and, we can have a conversation. Absolutely. Yeah. Uh-huh.
All right. Very good. I love it. Anne-Marie, I you know where I'm going to be leading up to, but I also have another question right now. Do you have anything more that you wanted to go over with? Because once again, I did what I usually do. I just, I kind of dive in, I take over the conversation. But you jumped in with a couple of questions, so that was good. But was there more you wanted to ask Dr. J about?
I think you covered a lot of it. I mean, a lot of it is this. I didn't realize there was just so much to think about. So I've been kind of thinking about a lot of what you've been saying, and just how many nutrients and minerals and whatever your body needs. You kind of think about your 5-a-day veg and your little bit of protein and your carbs and things. It's so huge. So I can see why coming to an expert like yourself is so useful, because it's quite overwhelming for somebody who doesn't deal with it on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
It is overwhelming. And by the way, I said you're Dr. J. You're actually Dr. H. Dr. J was a basketball player. He was very skilled, but different field entirely.
All good. All good.
A couple more things that we need to touch on. First of all, I always like to go to my co-hosts, particularly Anne-Marie, because they have great perspectives on what we talk about during the show. This is fairly typical for me to ask the questions, the guests to answer the questions, and the co-host to kind of kibitz along the way. But because of that, they have a perspective on it that I don't have. And very often that it matches closer to what the audience is having. So I like to go to them and say, Anne-Marie, if you're tying this together and you're saying this is where it all comes together for me, how are you tying it together today's conversation?
I think I liked the weekly hints and habit tracking kind of thing that you came up with. And I think from like a kind of somebody who I feel like a novice now in that area, because there is so much to think about, it is listening to your body and playing around with like nutrients and new foods and listening to your body. And I think the nugget that I absolutely loved was, what does your health mean to you? And think about that. And I thought that was very good, because it means different things to different people, but to you, really connect to that question.
Yeah, because when you do that, you're connecting to yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah, good stuff. I love that. And finally, Dr. H, I also have a thing I've been doing for the last couple of years, and I wanted to apply it to you too, because first of all, I want to thank you for joining us and sharing all this wonderful information. This is a great deep dive into some stuff that I had no idea we were going to go into it when we got started, but it played out really nicely. But you've also, I'm sure you do other podcasts and you have the different kinds of outreach that you do and so forth. And you're sharing all this great information with people, which is what people do who come onto this program. I mean, you found a passion in your life and you wanted to share all the stuff that you've learned with other people. And so you're giving away all this free content. And that's where I noticed that there was a little thing that was missing. What I noticed that was missing is that we don't get credit for that free content that we're putting out there. So on behalf of those people you've never met and never seen, never will meet, never will see, who've been receiving that content and being guided by you and helped by you in ways you didn't know about, on their behalf, thank you for what you're doing, because you're making a difference in this world.
Thank you, Walt. I really appreciate that. I really, really appreciate that. Yeah,
I think it's important. And your visit today kind of underlined it in a way that many visits do, but yours particularly did, because look at, my goodness, the stuff that came out that you were talking about. It was so useful. And one thing I do know, no matter what it is we talk about, there's always a listener on any given point that we're talking about that said, yes, I needed to hear that today. So you had a whole bunch of those that you shared. And
awesome.
That's why I wanted to recognize that. Thank you for doing that. Really, really.
Thank you. It is a privilege to do this work. So thank you very much. Thank you for making it possible.
Glad to have you. Thank you, Anne-Marie, and keep feeling better. We'll talk to you again next week. And thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.